Good morning. I was just about to say, I invite you to find, if you haven't already grabbed a cup of coffee, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee and find your way to a seat. There are seats in the front, even though I know that's scary for some of us. Please get comfortable with a neighbor and raise your hand if somebody can come and sit next to you. We've got plenty of space. I invite you now to begin transitioning from getting here to being here, as has become our practice, to let go of anything that is distracting your mind so that you might open your hearts and your ears to receive some of what is shared this morning. So as we settle in, I'd like to begin us with a time of prayer and invite you to join me if you'd like. God, who created each of us with love, we pray to you. Give us a spirit of curiosity that helps us to listen well. Give us a spirit of love that encourages us to seek justice. Give us a spirit of imagination that refuses to settle for less than your desires for all people. As we settle into this space, draw us together and shape stranger into neighbor and acquaintance into friend. May we look at the people we think are so different from us and find instead a collaborator, a colleague, a co-worker in the work of wholeness and justice for the world. We pray to the God who is love. Amen. I am so glad to welcome you back to our three-part series, An Ethic of Peace for the Holy Land. Over the last 2 weeks, we've been privileged to learn from two people, Peter Beinart and Mitri Rahab, who have shared from the Jewish and Christian perspectives about an ethic of peace for the Holy Land. And I'm so glad that this morning we'll get the opportunity to learn from Dr. Hadia Mubarak. This is concluding our three-part series, but I hope it's not concluding our work and our conversations. I invite you to find on your chair a piece of paper, and that piece of paper invites you to both ask questions. We'll invite you to pose questions to Hadia. If we have time afterwards, I'll be glad to moderate those questions. Also, we have a basket in the back where you can share your contact information. You can share any follow-up. We hope that this is the spark of a beginning of a conversation, and we're working on putting together some conversations for us to sit around tables instead of just in rows to have more conversation with one another. So I invite you to, if you feel comfortable, share a little bit of what you've learned, what you hope to continue in conversation about, and your contact information. Before I introduce Hadia, I would like to once again orient us to this space and how we'll share our time together. First, I invite you to join me in a spirit of appreciative inquiry, a spirit in which we listen to our speaker with curiosity and imagination before we expect a certain thing from her. So I invite you to receive what she has to share, and with an open and curious heart. Second, I ask that you would please give Hadia the space to share. Should you have trouble or disagreement with anything she shares, I invite you to write that down on a question. And if time allows, we'll be glad to pose questions at the end of our time together. We are gathered here privileged to get to learn from Hadia, and so we hope to share that space with her. And so you'll see those questions there. You can just write down any question during our time together that you might have. We have ushers and greeters staged across the back of the room, and that you can raise your hand gently and they will pick those up. And should time allow, we'll be glad to have a time for questions and responses. Following our time together, I'll invite Hadia to head out back to the courtyard. We'll have a small reception where we hope and encourage you to not just talk to Hadia, she's wonderful, she's one wonderful person in the room, but to have conversations with those who have been gathered here over the last 3 weeks. Finally, I'm glad to welcome and introduce Hadia Mubarak. Dr. Mubarak is a professor of religion at Queen's University in Charlotte and a specialist in Qur'anic exegesis. She has taught at Guilford College, UNC Charlotte, and Davidson, and she serves as scholar in residence at the Muslim Community Center of Charlotte. She holds a Ph.D. from Georgetown University, and she was the first woman elected president of the National Muslim Students Association. She will be sharing about an ethic of and path forward for peace in the Holy Land from the Islamic faith tradition. Will you please join me in welcoming her?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Morning. I think there's okay, my mic is on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Covenant Presbyterian Church for inviting me to church to share the Muslim perspective on an ethic of peace in the Holy Land. Let's see what I can do about this. I have a book here I want to share. It is rare to find churches that are inclusive or open to the Muslim perspective, and I commend this church's leadership for its bravery and inclusivity. I know there's a cost to being brave these days. And to that, I would comment, if there was no cost to being brave, then there would be no bravery in it. And I speak to you from a place today of grief and brokenness, with a heart that has been utterly devastated by the images of death, suffering, destruction, and displacement that I have witnessed for the last 2.5 years. However, the fact that you are here on a Sunday morning is a testament that you care. It is a testament to the fact that many in this country are not apathetic to the suffering of Palestinians, despite the policies of our US government. Your presence here reflects your open mind and, most importantly, your healthy heart. A healthy heart, not just in the physical sense, but more importantly, in the spiritual sense. In Islam, it is the heart, not the brain, that is the locus of intelligence. The Quran states, "Have they not traveled through the earth, and have they no hearts by which to reason and ears by which to hear? Indeed, it is not the eyes that are blind, but it is the hearts in the chest that grow blind." The hearts are the locus of understanding. Once we seal off our hearts, we have sealed off our intellect. And for this reason, I would like to start off by identifying the ways in which we have been conditioned as Americans to view Palestinians throughout the decades, a conditioning that seals off our hearts from trying to really understand their lived realities and experiences. The cognitive biases against Arabs and Palestinians are not just the product of ignorance or the absence of Palestinian narratives, but they are the product of a well-funded industry that deliberately characterizes Palestinians and, more broadly, Arabs and Muslims as inherently violent, as a people whose values are antithetical and incompatible with Western values. They are the result of a deliberate censorship of Palestinian voices and narratives in film, the media, academia, and beyond. Over 24 years ago, the late Arab-American professor of film studies, Dr. Jack Shaheen, released his groundbreaking book, Real Bad Arabs, with 2 E's, which demonstrated that the vast majority of American films, more precisely 936 out of 1,000 titles he examined, portrayed Arabs and especially Palestinians in dehumanizing ways. In his 2006 documentary, Dr. Shaheen explains one reason for this. He says, "One reason we have not been allowed to empathize with any Palestinians on the silver screen is because of the production of at least 30 films within a span of 20 years that vilified everything Arab, especially Palestinian." Not surprisingly, these 30 films were all produced by the American film company Canon, which was created by 2 Israeli film producers, and you can look this up. 19 years ago, Jack Shaheen asked his fellow colleagues in Hollywood, "Is there an unwritten code in Hollywood that we cannot and will not humanize Palestinians? And why can't we humanize Palestinians in the same way we humanize Israelis?" I teach a class on Muslims and pop culture at Queen's, which examines the ways in which the genre of film, in specific, constructs an image of Muslims as an imaginary other in the American public consciousness. From Rules of Engagement and True Lies to Executive Decision and American Sniper, films continue to construct the image of an Islam land, a place that marks everything that is wrong in the world, a construct, an imaginary construct that we are called to wage war against. From binary representations of Arab women as downtrodden beasts of burden or sex slaves in harems to representations of Arab men as violent, oppressive, and dangerous, the images of otherness that Americans consume on their screens have become the dominant lens through which we view the Arab world. Facts on the ground are interpreted through the lens of fantasy. The genre of war movies has been of particular interest to my students, who often recognize how the performance of Muslim religiosity on the screen by violent villains embeds the idea that America's wars in the Muslim world are not simply political, they are ideological. They are about preserving who we are as a people. These war films often entrench the idea that Arab and Muslim men, women, and even children cannot be trusted. One of the most problematic scenes and rules of engagement is the portrayal of a young, fat female Yemeni amputee on crutches as a terrorist. The one Arab character in the film, a child who for a moment solicits the viewer's sympathy, is no better than the rest of them. As Bell Hooks reminds us, films teach us lessons, even when we are unconscious of those lessons. In this case, the lesson is that there are no real victims in the Arab world. Those who lost their lives to war must have deserved it. The conditioning of American audiences to view dead brown Arab bodies as potential suspects, as potential threats, as people who must have done something to deserve such a horrific fate plays out in the real world as we speak. The inability to view Arabs and Palestinians as victims continues to have real implications for Americans' public support of US wars in the Arab world. Therefore, even when there are over 65,000 dead Palestinian bodies in just 2 years, the dominant political discourse either erases their suffering or blames them for their own deaths. In the last 712 days, the horrific violence, or now it's more than 712 after I wrote this, the horrific violence in the Gaza Strip has claimed the lives of more than 65,000 Palestinians. Even the former Israeli chief of the military, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, recently admitted on September 15 that Israel has killed or injured a tenth of Gaza's population. He stated, "There are 2.2 million people in Gaza." Really, we should say there were. There are in Gaza today more than 10%, he says, who were killed or injured, more than 200,000. This is not a gentle war. However, scholars have put the death toll at a much higher figure. According to 2 recent studies, the number of non-violent deaths in Gaza related to the war is 4 times higher as the number of violent deaths. Of these figures, at least 18,000 of the dead were Palestinian children. Many of them had not even reached their first birthday. According to the World Health Organization's general director, 1 Palestinian child is killed every 10 minutes. This means that by the end of our program today, 10 more children would have lost their lives. Yet we must not reduce these children to numbers. These children are just as valuable. These children are just as valuable in the eyes of God as our own children. In the next slide, I'm going to share with you the 2 children of my friend Musa Tawil, who is still in Gaza. And this video was before the genocide began. Their names are Kinan and Talin. And this was their life before the war began. In July 2024, a missile hit the home of Musa, instantly killing his 10-year-old daughter, Talin. Her father tells me that she excelled in her classes and loved to sing. Talin was not even born when Gaza held its last elections in 2006. Yet like the rest of the 18,000 children, she has paid the price of this genocide with her own life. Talin's brother, and you know, I can't help but, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way, just captivated by that image in the middle. She looks angelic, and I say to myself, because she is an angel. Talin's brother, Kinan, was severely injured. He suffered a rupture in the right coronary artery and left femoral artery. He had shrapnel in many parts of his body, including the pelvis, back, and hand, requiring multiple surgeries. He was granted permission to leave to Florida for medical treatment, where he stayed with my childhood friend, Iman. Part of his small intestine, spleen, and liver were removed, and one of his fingers was amputated. He is currently in Belgium with his mother and may never be able to see his father again. The dark side of the lack of medical infrastructure in Gaza, and I should say the deliberate lack of medical infrastructure, is that those granted permission to leave for medical care are unable to return, which leads to the permanent separation of families. There's another mother and child who came to Charlotte, actually, and she's currently in Belgium, and I am in touch with her on a daily basis. And she would do anything to be reunited with her daughter, who is in Gaza and has not been given permission by the Israeli authorities to leave, although she also was injured in the same blast as her brother, Cesar, and the third sibling had passed away, and Reem is in Belgium, separated now for potentially permanently from her husband and only daughter. I am in touch with Kinan and Talin's father on a daily basis as he updates me on what is happening in Gaza. No international reporters are allowed into this 25-mile strip, as we all know. What strikes me about him every single time I speak to him is his faith in God, his perseverance, and his kindness. Although I am a citizen of a country whose policies are responsible for the death of his daughter, the destruction of his home and livelihood, and his permanent separation from his son and wife, he shows no bitterness or rancor, only patience and gratitude. He tells me that even if the entire world has abandoned them, he knows that God is with them. And yes, God is with the oppressed of Gaza and the oppressed all over the world. And God is witness over all things. In the last few days since Israel's ground offensive has begun, Musa tells me he feels like he is living through the end of time. He stares at death every single day he remains alive. Yet death, he says, is preferable to him than being displaced once again. This image that you see is one of a number of images that he has shared with me this week. On some nights, I wake up multiple times thinking about Musa and his family, wondering if his last text message to me will be his last. His brother, Wa'il, has been severely injured in his leg by shrapnel and is no longer able to walk, so I know that Musa is unable to leave. He will never abandon his brother, and they are unable to leave. And as we know right now, there's a mass exodus from northern Gaza down all the way to, I don't know exactly what city it's reached right now, but if you're watching the news and you're following results, you know that there's a mass exodus, yet he cannot leave. And I wish with all my heart, as many of you do, that I could do something to stop this genocide. At times, it feels like there is a fire raging inside my heart, like the fire you see in this picture. And I find it ironic that it is the people of Gaza who console me, who demonstrate unrelenting faith at this time. And it reminds me of the faith of the disciples of Jesus, peace be upon him, whose courage the Quran captures when Jesus asks them, who will support me in God's cause? When people began to turn against Jesus, the disciples said, we will be God's helpers. We believe in God. Witness our devotion to him. Our Lord, we have believed in what you revealed and have followed the messenger, being Jesus. So record us among those who bear witness to the truth. As Israel intensifies its assault on Gaza, I ask everyone in this room to serve as witnesses to the truth of what is happening, just as the disciples bore witness to the truth of Jesus, peace be upon him. If you have not already, befriend a Palestinian in Gaza, as international reporters are denied entry into Gaza. We, the people, must take their place. Please use your platforms to amplify what is happening there. Be their voice. Some of you might be shocked by the data and stories I've shared, which is an indication of a spiritually healthy heart that has not lost touch with God's commandment to protect human life and love all of his creation. Yet even in our own city of Charlotte, the loss of Palestinian life is not treated equally to the loss of Israeli life. The suffering of Palestinians is not deemed as worthy of our attention or concern as the suffering of other people. Whereas the Mecklenburg County Commissioners passed a resolution, or I should say the Mecklenburg County Commissioners passed a resolution on October 17, 2023 that condemned only the loss of Israeli life without any mention of the loss of Palestinian life, even though by that day 3 times as many Palestinians had been killed as Israelis. The resolution's complete erasure of Palestinian deaths sent a clear message to our community, a message we have heard time and time again. Palestinian lives don't matter to those who wield political power. Palestinian lives don't matter according to the dominant political discourse. Yet we know, as believers in God, as believers that we are all the descendants of Adam and Eve, our primal parents, that all human life is valuable, irrespective of what the dominant political discourse tells us. And with that, I would like to transition to discuss the relationship between Islam and its theological precursors, Christianity and Judaism. While Judaism and Christianity historically viewed Islam as the new kid on the block, a religion that emerges out of 7th century Arabia, Islam, on the other hand, connects itself theologically to the sacred history of both Judaism and Christianity. Much of the Quran is a retelling of biblical narratives with overlapping similarities, yet critical differences. And my students are always so surprised. They're like, wait, Jesus is the Messiah in the Quran? Like, yes, he is the Messiah in the Quran, and many other similarities. The most frequently mentioned prophet in the Quran is Moses, recognized as a liberator of the Israelites from the tyranny and oppression of Pharaoh, a Pharaoh who could escape human accountability, but could not escape divine accountability. Why is this important for the theme of an ethic of peace in the Holy Land? Because from the prism of Muslim theology, God's selection of prophets and messengers throughout human history, many of whom were Israelites, and God's decision to send divine revelation to human communities was for one ultimate purpose: to guide humanity back to God, the source of all human existence, and to inspire human beings to live up to the highest potential of good character, morality, and ethics, recognizing their ultimate return to God. God's covenant, as the name of his church, through his messengers, including Ishmael in the Quran, is for all those who submit to God. Like Christianity, Islam believes that it is your faith, good deeds, and sincerity, not your tribal affiliation, that makes you near or beloved to God. At this point, I would like to address 5 significant myths we often hear about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. 1, that this is a religious war. 2, that this is a war of 2 sides. 3, Palestinians have not tried nonviolent resistance. And 4, that you can defeat an ideology of resistance with military violence. And 5, that this conflict began on October 7th. Excuse me. So to argue that this war is driven by religion is not only historically inaccurate, but it is a cop-out. When we frame this war as fueled by people's religious identities, it just justifies the false narrative that there's nothing we can do about it. Oh, well, they just hate each other. They've always hated each other and will continue to fight irrespective of what we do. You have no idea how many times I heard this growing up, especially in the South. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we know this, we've witnessed this in the last 3 weeks as Covenant Church has heard, and we have today in this room, people from all the Abrahamic faiths here peacefully willing to listen to each other, including our respected speaker who came 2 weeks ago, Peter Beinart. So in contrast to common opinion, Muslims, Jews, and Christians coexisted peacefully in the Middle East for centuries prior to the 20th century. I would like to take us back to the very formative period of Islam, 7th century Arabia. In 622 in the Common Era, Prophet Muhammad migrates from Mecca as a refugee, escaping an assassination attempt on his life, to Medina, where he is welcomed as the leader of a new political entity. This date, 622, is so critical in Muslim history that the Muslim calendar begins with this date. The migration transforms Islam from being the religion of a handful of persecuted individuals on the margins of society to becoming its autonomous political entity and religious community in Medina, which is about a 4-hour drive today from Mecca in current-day Saudi Arabia. One of the first things that Prophet Muhammad does when he creates the first Muslim polity is to create an alliance with the 3 Jewish tribes in Medina. The names of these tribes are Banu Nadir, Banu Qaynuqa, and Banu Qurayza. This document officially becomes known as the Constitution of Medina, which establishes that Muslims and Jews are one community and obliges each of them to protect the other if they come under attack. And this is a well-known historical document. It's considered one of the earliest from this period, and so I really encourage you to do some research on the Constitution of Medina. The second important historical document I would like to bring to your attention is a treaty that the Muslim ruler made with the Christians of Jerusalem upon the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem in 636 in the Common Era. And this has also been historically documented. This is from an academic piece by David DeCake. I think the piece is called "The Myth of a Militant Islam." And the treaty says, "This is the assurance of safety which the servant of God, Omar, the commander of the faithful, has granted the people of Jerusalem. He has given them an assurance of safety for themselves, for their property, their churches, their crosses, the sick and the healthy of the city, and for all the rituals that belong to their religion. Their churches will not be inhabited by Muslims and will not be destroyed. Neither they, nor the land on which they stand, nor their crosses, nor their property will be damaged. They will not be forcibly converted. The people of Jerusalem must pay the poll tax like the people of other cities, and they must expel the Byzantines and the robbers." Now, you all heard from an Arab Christian, a Palestinian theologian just last week. And, of course, we all know how the identities of Arabs and Muslims are often conflated, and people think it's one and the same. And as someone who's visited the Middle East frequently and recognizes that some of the oldest sects of Christianity are in the Middle East, I always find it so surprising that we in America completely erase this important community that potentially has closer historical ties to Jesus, peace be upon him, than Christians living in other parts of the world, right? Because they literally were from the very same place, and they've lived side by side. My grandparents in Jordan, their next door neighbors are Christian, and these are families that have been Christian for centuries. And that's another thing I always try to clarify. People think, oh, Christians in the Middle East, it's because of recent missionary efforts in the last century and a half. In fact, no, these are communities that date back to the very beginning of Christianity, and they are Arab and Christian at the same time. And we need to give recognition for this ethnic and religious identity. And so I only share that to say that this became known as the Omar Covenant, and this is one reason why so many historic religious sites in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, in Nazareth have been preserved, because this land was under Muslim rule from 636 until 1917. So if this was a religion that was hell-bent on converting people and destroying their religious places, how do those places still exist when it was under Muslim rule for that long? And so, as I established, Muslims, Christians, and Jews peacefully coexisted in pre-modern Palestine until the current period. So what changes in the 20th century? What changes? And I would say what changed was the creation and the violent creation of a modern nation state, the State of Israel, and subsequent displacement of 800,000 Palestinians from current-day Israel. Until today, the descendants of those refugees, like my brother-in-law, whose wife is here, my nieces and nephews, are denied the right to return, since their very existence within Israel undermines the pursuit of Jewish self-sovereignty. And we have in this room, I believe, at least 2 people who are related to my brother-in-law, whose mother actually comes from Ramle, which is in current-day Israel, and could never have the privilege of going back and living there and residing there and becoming citizens of the very city that their mother and grandmother and generations of ancestors lived in. Why? Because they're Arab, that's why. And until we shift the discourse that this is a system that disenfranchises one ethnic group and privileges another ethnic group, we will continue to skirt around the source of the conflict. Zionism, as a secular political ideology that emerges in Western Europe due to the hostile anti-Semitism of Europeans, is an ideology that is predicated on the creation of a state with a Jewish majority. The question becomes, how do you construct a Jewish majority when the majority indigenous population was not Jewish at the time in 1948. And there's a historical consensus on this. But yet you've created a state where you've said that this state must have a Jewish ethnic majority. How do you do this? You do this in two ways. First, you incentivize Jewish migration to this land, known as Aliyah, by providing open citizenship and benefits to anyone who is Jewish from anywhere in the world. And I'm not sure I can read this from here, but hopefully you can read it, right? The 1950 law of return in Israel grants every Jew the right to migrate to and settle in Israel. And the law of return was amended in 1970 to actually allow for the grandchildren of Jewish people, even if they were not Jewish, or their spouses, and these are, you can look up what current Israeli citizenship laws are, can become Jewish citizens, which means they can benefit from all the privileges that come with being a citizen. Now, and I do have to say this for clarity, there's no problem with people from any ethnic background, any religious background, migrating to a place to become a citizen of that place if they can. But when you have a state that's predicated on the displacement of the indigenous population to allow room, right? So when my father came and migrated to this country in 1979, it was not predicated on removing anyone. It wasn't like, oh, we want Arabs now to come to the United States of America, right? This, I know it sounds preposterous, and we no longer want this other ethnic group that exists. They have to go somewhere else. We'll give them South Carolina, right? Like that. And that's really the source of the issue. So the second strategy was to reduce the Arab population by either displacement or making life very difficult so they willfully migrate. Early Zionists had discussed what would be a bearable Arab population. And in fact, I highly recommend Ilan Pappé's book, an Israeli historian and scholar who's done incredible historical research on this, on how life was made so difficult under martial law in occupied territories since 1967, to really encourage the willful migration of Arabs from occupied territories. The name of the book is called The World's Largest, I think it's called The World's Largest Prison. Yeah, The World's Largest Prison. It's an excellent source of historical data on this. So what is the source of the conflict? It is a political system that systemically privileges one group and disenfranchises another group based on one single factor, their ethnicity. So whether you are Jewish or Arab determines everything in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. It determines which laws apply to you, which neighborhoods you can live in, which side of the security fence you can live on, and whether you are tried under civil or martial law in the West Bank. It determines whether or not you can work in Israel. It determines what roads you can travel on and whether or not you can own a gun or any weapon, and a host of other issues, right? This is why people like Saifullah, a US citizen who was only, I believe, 21 years old, was killed in the West Bank on his family's own property, because it's only the Jewish settlers are allowed to be armed, and the Palestinians are not allowed to be armed, even on their own occupied territory. And I encourage you, if any of you travel to the Holy Land, to make sure that you also visit the West Bank and you visit the Palestinian areas so that you actually have a holistic perspective on what is happening. The second myth I would like to address is that this is a war of two sides. Israel has one of the most powerful militaries in the world, with a defense budget of $15 billion. The Palestinians in Gaza have no military, or in the West Bank for that matter, no tanks, no jets, no missiles, or even police in the case of Gaza. Their only airport was destroyed in 2001. They cannot use their ports for trading. They are not allowed to even access the Mediterranean coast as of now to go fishing or even swimming. So they're not even allowed to fish in God's seas because of Israel's control over the Mediterranean coast. Israel's economy is thriving with a GDP of $540.4 billion. In stark contrast, Gaza's GDP has fallen to 91 million as a result of ongoing wars and crippling sanctions on Gaza since 2007. Israel has waged war at least 15 times on Gaza since 1948. Israeli citizens, many of whom hold other passports, are free to roam most of the world, and Palestinians are stateless. and literally trapped in the hell on earth that their neighbor has created for them. Israel controls the land, sea, and airspace on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And I'll talk about in a minute, you can't even come close to the border without being shot by the IDF. And I'll mention the March of Return in 2018. In October 2023, Anthony Kordsman, writing for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, stated Israel is so strong relative to Hamas that it can both defeat Hamas and establish almost any new security structure in Gaza that Israel wants. This is a fellow emeritus chair of the strategy studies for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So I do want to say, let us speak factually and with academic integrity. These are not two equal sides coming to the tables for negotiation. There is a stateless, displaced, occupied Palestinian population desperately struggling for freedom and a better quality of life. And I should add now, desperately searching for food, for water. I saw yesterday a video from a graphic designer in Gaza who was pursuing his graphic design, and now he is just searching for water, spending his days searching for water so he can survive. So once we accept this fact that there's no parity, that it's not really a conflict, perhaps we can bring some measure of reason to the endless violence. The third myth I would like to address is that Gazans did not try nonviolent resistance. And they have. Many of you may have known about the March of Return in 2018 and 2019. In fact, there was an incredible documentary. The Wedgwood Church had a film festival, and I watched this documentary, and even I, who've been reading very avidly about Palestine, did not know. I was shocked to learn so many of the details of what happened with this great March of Return when I watched this documentary hosted by Wedgwood Church. And what happened is they were all unarmed civilians, some of them healthcare workers, because they knew people were getting shot at the fence that borders Israel. They brought paramedics, they brought journalists, and even those individuals were getting shot. There were many people who were kneecapped, so shot in the knees so that they could become not able to walk again. So about 30,000 Palestinians were injured, unarmed Palestinian civilians, just for aspiring to return to their ancestral homeland. And 195 Palestinians, including 41, were killed during this Great March of Return. So Piers Morgan asks us, where is the Palestinian Nelson Mandela? And I want to remind Piers and others, Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist when he was fighting apartheid and served 27 years in prison. So whoever the Palestinian Nelson Mandela is today, chances are that he's in prison, or she. The fourth myth I would like to address is that you can defeat an ideology of resistance with military violence. After 9/11, a political scientist, Robert Pape, studied over 2,200 suicide terrorist attacks within a period of 30 years. His data definitively demonstrates that military occupation is the root cause of suicide terrorism. The Taliban in Afghanistan coalesced in the aftermath of Soviet occupation of their country. Hezbollah emerges in Lebanon after Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon in 1982. They did not exist prior to that occupation. Look it up. Al-Qaeda forms in Iraq only after the US occupation of Iraq in 2003. They did not exist prior to that. There were no suicide bombings in Iraq prior to the US occupation. And Hamas is created 20 years after Israel illegally occupies Gaza in 1967 and never leaves. Whether in the Middle East, Latin America, or East Asia, Pape's data shows that 97% of suicide terrorist attacks are in response to a foreign occupation. Why is this relevant? Because foreign occupation is the breeding ground for resistance. With every single bomb Israel drops, with every single man, woman, and child it kills, with every building it destroys, and with every day that it continues its illegal occupation of Gaza, the Israeli government fuels the resistance. It gives birth to continued resistance, which you cannot defeat with military might or violence, but the opposite. If a government truly wants peace, then it must withdraw its troops off foreign soil. And the last myth I would like to address is that this began on October 7th. Way before 2023, you had Ilan Pappé calling, and other human rights organizations calling Gaza the world's largest open-air prison, because people were entrapped. People have nowhere to go. Norman Finkelstein described it, one of the greatest political scientists in this country, who's an American Jew. He said that Israel had turned Gaza into a concentration camp long before 2023. Since the suffocating blockade of 2007, nobody could go into Gaza or leave, with very rare exceptions. This has been the only human conflict where no one can escape, neither by boat, nor land, nor sea. You know, we all watched when there was a conflict in Syria or the conflict in Yemen, people jumping on rafts and dinghies, even if it meant that they would lose their life. Any country that has a coastal line, people try that route to escape. Why have we not seen a single Palestinian family try to escape Gaza when they have a huge coastal line? Because they know since 2007 that if they went past that 3-mile nautical sanctioned line, they would get sniped, and people would get sniped if they went past it, whether it was to fish or boat or anything else. So this is, you know, they are literally trapped in a 25 by 5 mile radius with absolutely nowhere to go and no safe zone. And that is why even prior to 2023, in 2021, that dreadful summer, when we watched, you know, that the violence and destruction happening, what breaks your heart is also knowing that they are literally entrapped in this area. And I want to also just add that 70% of the population of Gaza consists of refugees from the 1948 war, and they are the descendants of those refugees, and that is something that political scientist Norman Finkelstein has documented. And so these are people who were displaced from Israel, and why are they in Gaza? Because God had created them Arab and not Jewish. Because had they been Jewish, they would have been granted Israeli citizenship and welcomed with open arms, and there would be no conflict about which to speak today. And we all know that as early as 2018, the United Nations said that that Gaza would be unlivable by 2020. And we all know right now that there's a confirmed human-made and man-made famine. And it breaks my heart. I just want to conclude with the following. I wrote this reflection after the war, a few months after the war broke out. And I'll just share this with you. There are people in our country who would like us to cheer when bombs rain down. There are people in our country who desire that we witness the violence in Gaza from the scope of the snipers shooting at unarmed civilians, from the lens of the pilots dropping incendiary bombs that burn the flesh. They want us, like them, to justify this indiscriminate and disproportionate violence as a just and necessary war. And it requires integrity, courage, and a strong moral compass to reject these racist discourses and dismantle oppressive rhetorical structures that inflict real violence on the bodies of our brothers and sisters in humanity. Morality and courage require us to align ourselves with the suffering, the oppressed, the victims, even if it's unpopular, even if we lose friends and favors, even if we risk everything. This is the way of the prophets, the way of those who taught humanity anything they ever knew about God and living a God-centered life. It is that every human life has value, that no one's life is of greater value than another in the eyes of God. Yet in this day and age of hyper-nationalism and militarism in which we live, people seem to have forgotten the golden rule and instead treat war as if it's a football game in which you cheer for one side to destroy the other. When mothers witness their children dying before their very eyes, there is nothing to cheer and everything to mourn. The natural human response to another human being's suffering is empathy and compassion. Yet if we find ourselves unable to empathize with the suffering of another people, then we need to realize that that is perhaps because we have dehumanized them in our psyche, believing they are less than human and therefore not worthy of our compassion. I ask you to uphold the golden rule and remember there is something we can and should do when we witness human suffering. We do not have to be bystanders. We can use our God-given privileges to uphold Palestinians' equal right to life, security, and freedom, and we can do so by sharing their stories with the world. I should have put that first. So with your indulgence, I will conclude with the poem of Rafat al-Arir, the Palestinian poet, writer, professor, and father, who was killed on December 6, 2023. This was a poem. This was a poem he wrote to his daughter. He wrote, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it white with a long tail so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite, you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale." Thank you.
Hadia, thank you so much for not just your beautiful words and your beautiful presentation, but as you began, you named that we were sharing the heart of this story. And so thank you for bringing the heart of this story to our imaginations and our understanding. I know that we have just a few more minutes and I've seen several questions come up. And I hope that our conversation here, Hadia, I'll ask you if you don't mind coming back up here and standing up here. Um, Thank you. We have a few questions that have come up. I'd love to begin with these. And I hope that in our conversation, I know Hadia, you and I have talked before, and thank you for being here, that we're modeling a path forward for conversation of how we can be inquisitive of one another and looking forward to a path of peace. One question that's come up is that you shared in your talk the shared values and the shared history of the three Abrahamic faiths. What values do you think are important? I know we shared about the shared humanness. What values do you think are important from the Islamic tradition and all three traditions that we might bring forward for a path of peace?
Yeah, so thank you so much for that question. We know that the law of Moses, the law that is in a lot of Leviticus and Deuteronomy is actually Jesus upheld the law, Prophet Muhammad upheld the law, and one of the fundamental parts that we all know, it's part of our 10 commandments, is thou shalt not kill. And the Quran, in fact, repeats a midrashic commentary that says that whoever kills one person, it's as if they have killed all of humanity. And whoever saves one life, it's as if they have saved all of humanity. And this is, God demonstrating the value of human life. That one innocent life killed in the eyes of God is as if you've wiped out humanity. And so these are values that are central to the Abrahamic faiths, to Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And I would just say, as American citizens, as tax payers, we don't want our tax dollars used to kill people, to kill innocent people who did nothing wrong but be born in a place that God destined for them to be born. I could have been born in Gaza, right? My nieces and nephews who, my sister's here today, their grandmother decided to go up north to escape to Jordan, but she could have decided to go south, and they could have been in Gaza because the refugees during 1948 either went north or south, whatever direction they could peacefully, they could safely escape. And so this is I think the most central value is that we should honor the sacredness of human life.
Thank you. And I think first, as you've naming each life that has been lost as human life, recognizing the humanness in each person. Thank you. A question came up about how we've gotten to a place in our country where we cannot share in religious spaces about violence. And I know you named that we're kind of breaking the trend by being here. What encouragement would you have for people in this room to not keep this conversation just in this room, but to share it with communities of faith across the city, across the region, whether it's churches or other communities of faith? What encouragement might you have for how we could do that?
So I think one thing that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have in common is that we are accountable to God first and foremost. We are accountable to God before we are accountable to any human being. And, I ask this question of myself every day. Will I prioritize what other people think, how they see me, over what God thinks of me, right? And I think that this moral compass needs to be the moral compass that drives us, because we all know, right, as believers in God, that we will return to God, that we will have moral accountability, and our deeds matter. Our deeds matter. And this is something that, Jesus taught, peace be upon him, the story of the Good Samaritan. And what we do in this short span of life that God has privileged and blessed us with, right? God could have chose to not bring us into existence, but the fact that he brought each one of you into existence means that you are meant to be in this world, and you are meant to do something with the short life you have. And when you know that there are innocent people dying in the name of our, with our funding from our tax dollars, in the name of our country, to look the other way, in the midst of this, what would God think of us? What would God think of bringing us into existence when we act so cowardly? So that's what I would share. Let's break the fear, because there has been a monopoly and a sort of monopoly over who can say what and who can share their narratives and whose voices matter. And I think if we center God and we say, we don't care what you're going to say about us, we care what God thinks of us, I think we're going to see a lot more bravery and courage in the coming years.
Thank you. It certainly reminds me of something that Peter shared when he was here 2 weeks ago, which, gosh, so much has erupted in that time and taken place. But he shared, no one else gets to tell you about your moral conscience, that we are accountable to God. And I think that is a theme that's carried us throughout our entire time. I want to close with this is kind of I'm combining a few questions here that have come up as our last question, and a little bit of personal privilege. You and I had a conversation maybe 2 weeks ago in preparation for you coming, and we talked about our own reckoning of faith, and my own reckoning of faith that I've experienced as a Christian person who's seen my faith used in such a way that is causing violence. And you've shared a similar reckoning of faith. What has that reckoning looked like for you, and how might we all kind of wrestle with that, not just to both a deeper understanding of our faith and also a deeper path towards peace?
Yeah. So that's a pretty big question, because I think, yeah, yeah. Because I may have shared with you, I think when we had that conversation when I was a sophomore at Florida State University and 9/11 broke out, and how one of the most difficult parts for me as I was grieving for the loss of life was trying to fathom how people who shared my faith or claimed they shared my faith could inflict so much violence in the world, could use my faith, which had been my sanctuary, my moral compass, the thing that actually should lead you to behave in gentle and kind ways with humanity, that they could weaponize my faith in such a way. And this is, I think maybe I shared, and I do share this with my students, what eventually led me into academia, what eventually led me to first pursue a master's degree in contemporary Arab studies right after I finished my undergraduate degree, because I was trying to make sense of the world around me and trying to frankly answer this question of why that I could not answer at that time as a young Muslim American woman growing up in Florida. And then, eventually it led me to my degree in religious studies. But I will say that I also came to recognize that a lot of people who, I'll say extremists in any faith community, who say they're doing something in the name of their faith, are often the most divorced and detached spiritually from that faith, and are oftentimes, it's identity politics. It's, I read this really great piece on Substack. I think, I'm trying to remember, Robert Rosenthal may have shared it, and talking about how the saddest thing is when people grow up in these identity politics and then don't question for a minute, why am I supporting this group of people? Why am I supporting these policies? you know, and the difference between sports, which yes, you grow up maybe being a Panthers fan or a a Cowboys fan, like my husband, a Dallas Cowboys fan. You may grow up with that, but when it comes to war, it's not a football game. You really have to question the narratives you've been told and the loyalties, and why do you have the loyalties you have? It's no longer a football game. When there's lives being lost, when there's violence being inflicted, and yeah, so this is what I'll share. And I'll always say, because even today in the K through 12 curriculum, we have a problem. We just commemorated 9/11, that we continue to use this very problematic discourse that entrenches Islamophobia of, the Islamic radical terrorists, where we never call the KKK, radical Christians, because we know the KKK was weaponizing Christian symbols, but that we know enough about Jesus, peace be upon him, and his message of peace to know that that is not Jesus. And unfortunately, in this country, we do not know enough about Islam. We do not know enough about Prophet Muhammad or the Quran to recognize that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, and these fanatical groups are actually betraying the fundamental teachings of the Quran and Prophet Muhammad.
Hadia, thank you both for sharing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope in sharing that, that's an invitation for all of us to have some reckoning of our own faith. I know it's an invitation for me to ask why and how my own Christian faith has been weaponized to be destructive. So thank you for that invitation for us to not just hear your story, but to reckon with our own faith. I'm going to invite you, Hadia. We talked about this before. It's going to be a quick, lonely walk to the courtyard, but hopefully a moment for you to catch your breath. You've shared so beautifully. So I'll let you head out to the courtyard, and I'll invite everyone.
Thank you. I'll see you outside.
Excuse me, I'll invite folks to join Hadia and others outside. And I'll finally invite you to, if you haven't already, to use your blank piece of paper on your chair. If you'd like to continue this conversation, you can leave your contact information. If you would like to share about ways that you'd like to continue the conversation, questions that you have, what this might look like, we have a basket in the back and invite you to do so. But I firmly, from the bottom of my heart, thank each person who has been here over the last 3 weeks for engaging in a hard, difficult, and beautiful conversation. Thank you for being here.